This is the March 21st interview with Ruth Hawley. She's almost 92 years old, and she's talking about her memories of her childhood growing up. And in this interview, she's going to start talking from the time she was just about ready to enter junior high school.
I was starting the 8th grade.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead and talk. It's on.
It's on, okay. Well, we moved up to Sydney, and it was a very nice step up for us because we had this lovely home to move into. We had very nice neighbors, and they had a daughter named Martha. There was a family of 10 children, and she was the third down from the. But she was my bosom pal for the rest of my life. And she's the one that went into be a nun with the Ursuline nuns the week she was 17. Well, we'll talk about that another time. But I rode to school. The first school I went to, no, it wasn't. It was the high school. I went to the 8th grade, and I rode with another neighbor, and the car picked me up. And that was when I graduated from the 8th grade, and they had a real ceremony for it. It was a big step up to the students for those days, because many of them, the 8th grade was as far as they went.
Mm-hmm.
That was considered adequate for the boys that wanted to be farmers, and so we had the head of the professor.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very strict man. He'd been employed by the penitentiary to have this. He had the credentials for being an instructor in the penitentiary and he was tough.
Mm-hmm.
And any of the older boys just thought they could be macho men. They got taken down because he knocked them flat and then kicked them out of school. They always got flattened.
Okay, so you're talking about your school in the 8th grade.
Yeah, that was the first. I was trying to think. Oh, I know. Russell was out of high school. He was out of the Lincoln schools, and we had a car then, and we drove ourselves. Russell and I drove. He was in the senior year, and I was in the 8th grade at a different school. And Russell was.
So you drove in from your farm into town.
Yeah, well, that's right. I couldn't get that in my head right, but that was how I started school. It was in the 8th grade.
In Sydney, Nebraska.
Professor Ross was the name of the instructor, and he was well respected and feared. No, the kids didn't want to tangle with him, and he also taught. He taught one of my classes, and there was no fooling around with him. And he was fair and everything, and I had nice teachers. I had several other teachers that were very good, and I had a very pleasant time in the 8th grade. And but that was the year Russell and our neighbor girl, the farm below us, the Fullers, their daughter, Rowena, she rode with us. So Russell had us Rowena was in the same grade with Russell, and she was a beautiful girl. Oh my, she was so pretty. Her brother was at the time he'd been admitted to West Point, and they had a very lovely ranch, and they had hired hands, and it was a high society type of life for that area. The neighbors, and old Clark, he ran things the way that the rich run something, and Katie Hatcher used to go over there. And
who's Katie Hatcher?
That was another neighbor woman that was bingo in her head. She didn't know much, and she lived in a 24 by 24 foot house. It had a wall between them. It was just divided smack in half. And Oscar, his parents lived on the farm adjoining us, and Katie was as brainless as they come. She didn't know anything. She was like a 5-year-old kid. And Oscar was an old bachelor, and he, somewhere or other they met, and they were married, and Katie, she kept house there, but she went all over the neighborhood. Anybody that she'd see a car going to their house, she was there. She just spent her life uh, roaming around through the like when Uncle Ray's came out and they drove up the road. The different she was so lonesome, and you couldn't blame her because she had a terrible lonesome life. And her mother-in-law, they had the farm below her, and she was mistreated by her mother-in-law. But anyway, to make a bad matters better, eventually they found oil on their land. So Katie, I guess everything worked out.
So they got a lot of money out of that.
Oh yeah, but Katie was. I was at that time. I was 12 years old
Mm-hmm.
in the 8th grade. That was my age when we went to Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie furnished amusement, but she got to be a terrible bore.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Ray, no matter who it was, would come, and she weighed over 200 pounds, about 260 pounds,
Uh-huh.
and she was in her early, I think maybe 27 or 8 years old. She'd been married since she was 16 to this older. Oscar was his name.
Yeah.
He was a good guy,
Okay.
but
well, actually, I really want to hear more about
So-
you than the neighbors.
well, I used to walk over to her place just for something to do.
Mm-hmm.
Across it was a good mile's walk, maybe a mile and a half, and so one day I got invited to go to the mother-in-law's house for dinner, and Oscar had a brother. And I was
Were you Oscar's
I
brother's
was
date?
signed up to be Oscar's lady friend, and they put it in the paper that I was a dinner guest. I was about 15, 16. You couldn't imagine the gossip that flew around me. I can't remember that silly man's name, but they were all goofy. This was goofy, but they furnished amusement for everybody. And they had the mother-in-law, and I had to walk to get over there, and I had innocent. I had no more idea of anything, but they had me fired up and put it in the paper. I was a dinner guest, and then put his name right next to mine. Of course, that's all it took.
What did your family say?
Oh, my mother was horrified. So was my dad. Those ignoramuses. Oh, dear. I can't remember that fellow's name. And there was never anything. I never picked up on anything. I was just a kid. I didn't know what they were up to. But Katie was the one that was the instigator of putting that thing in the paper. She didn't know anything.
So did Uncle Russell tease you about that later?
Oh, no, it was just so awful. Oh, we were just ashamed to even have our names connected.
So you didn't go back for a second dinner with...
Oh, no. Well, they knew very well I wasn't interested in him. It just to create a little excitement. Katie had to have news for her.
Uh-huh.
She was the country editor.
So did you go all through high school then in Sydney?
Well, after the 8th grade, then's when I went to the Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through the 9th and 10th grade there at St. Pat's,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic Academy.
Why did you go there?
Well, because I could get a ride with the Schmidt family. That was Martha's brother, was driving a car, and my dad had to have the truck, and they went right by my door. Their little roadway ran up by the side of our house even.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we were very compatible. And I was back and forth with them, and we were new to the neighborhood. I think my dad paid $1. It was either $1 or $1.50 a month for my ride expense,
Mm-hmm.
and that lasted for 2 years. I went through the 9th and 10th grade at St. Patrick's Academy.
Mm-hmm. And you liked that school?
Oh, yes.
You had a lot of nice friends?
It saved my life to being more or less of a better student. And it kept me out of the little town actions of the girls that were running around. And they always do in these places. And I was in storage. Except I visited with all Martha's brothers. And she had 2 little sisters and little folks. And Charlie was about 2 years older than Martha. He was, but he drove the first year. He was in senior in high school, and he was about 17, and he was interested in dating, but he didn't have any money. Poor kid, he didn't have anything. I used to cut his hair for him because his mother chopped it off, just chop, 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 and that was with 10 kids. And poor Charlie, he knew I was cutting. Well, I cut everybody's hair, including the little brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So he was the driver.
And he was the driver the first year, and he had his this ornery old sister had been mean to him earlier on, several years before, and didn't want him to come to school, so he was out of school for a year. And no, I guess it wasn't him; it was his brother Lawrence that happened to. And so everything went fine, and I was a good student. I was looking the other day through some old papers, and I saw my report cards, and it was about, I averaged pretty close to a B+ average.
That's good. What was Uncle Russell doing at that point?
At that point, he was in high school. He went to work. He was making $10 a week.
Mm-hmm. What kind of job did he do?
Well, he worked in the grocery store as a day laborer.
Mm-hmm. So he was still living at home?
And I was at home. And Russell had won, he was a valedictorian of the high school when he graduated. And we didn't have any money.
This was about what year?
Well, it'd be
like 1934? 1934?
Yeah, okay. About there. And I was about 14.
Uh-huh.
And poor Russell, to keep food on the table, he worked at Greenleaf's grocery store there in Sydney.
Uh-huh.
Well, anyway, time passed.
Uh-huh.
But he did drive. There was the two years, and he went 1 year because he lacked 1 year of graduating from high school.
Uh-huh.
But he drove the 1 year with Rowena riding with us.
Uh-huh.
That was. But he stayed when we moved out there. He stayed and lived with Margaret and Dee, and he slept on a cot down at the base of their stairway in the apartment they rented from my Uncle Ray.
Uh-huh.
And so Russell, he didn't have any help or anything, but that was just to get his high school grad, and he graduated with high honors and was feted in the graduation exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And
you were 15 or 14 at the time.
Yeah, I was 13. I just turned 13 in the 8th grade.
Okay.
And but we had no money. We were broke.
Mm-hmm.
And if we did, Russell, but well, I won't say we didn't have any, because my father got acquainted with a man by the name of Sowards, and he was a lawyer, and he was desperate, and he had a drinking problem, and a wife and 3 little kids, and he was the instigator, knew how to do it. About that time was when Roosevelt threw a lifeline to people like my father, and he got my dad money from the government. It wasn't more than $200 or $300 to get seed for his crops, and that's how we I don't know what would have happened,
mm-hmm.
because that's how we got money for food.
Okay. What was Grandma doing at that time?
Oh, she was a housewife.
Uh-huh.
and raised in the garden. We had a nice garden, and still knew how to work if she felt like it. but and she was a good cook, and we always had a pleasant time. I never was afraid to come home if I wanted to do anything, and I'd go ahead and do it. He was always on my side, or Russell's.
Okay.
We could do no wrong.
So at your school, then you went to the Catholic school. Did you have things like dances or what kind of thing? What did you do for fun?
We had in the academy. We had open house for the visiting priests. They had a holiday, and I remember it was Father Link's 25th silver anniversary being a priest. So they conjured up this big soiree with all the visiting priests and they would, of course, they were all hungry for a little entertainment, and we had songs that we'd learned to sing, and I forget, we helped wait on the tables, and nuns, and they all came from backgrounds. They all knew how to work, really, and they had a big banquet there, and I think that time was the time when they had a dance I tripped and fell from the top step going into the basement down. It had wide steps, and I about brained myself. I remember doing that at the dance. That took all the dignity out of my being glamorous. And there was pleasant memories there,
Okay. How long did you stay in Sydney?
We were there 4 years. The first the first year was when I went to the 8th grade public school. Then I went 2 years to the Catholic school.
And then did you graduate from high school there? Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. So why did you leave Sydney?
Well, we got foreclosed on.
What happened?
We had no money. And all we owed was $3,200 on back. It was for taxes. The land was paid. It was for taxes, I guess. And we drove off. My dad loaded up we had nice furniture, and he loaded up a truck, took it over to a neighboring place across the border there in Colorado, someplace, where they had furniture auctions, and he got maybe $100 for the whole works. And I know we sold the piano to a local family, and they never paid us for it. And that was the biggest item we had, and we didn't get our money for that even. And that was that money, and maybe he had a few dollars from the government, because Mr. Sowards, he got every penny he knew how, because we were very good friends with the Sowards family. And they literally went hungry.
Okay, so you left, you just had to leave. You left.
We took a car that wasn't paid for, because we still had possession of it. And we headed out for Oregon, where my father's nephew, that would be DeLoss's brother, Cliff, lived with his family.
Okay.
And Cliff worked in the mill.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that in the next chapter when we do the next interview.